There is a room inside you that you have never entered. Its door is locked from the inside. You walk past it every day, a dozen times, 100 times, feeling its presence like a cold draft beneath the threshold. Sometimes, late at night, when the world grows quiet and your defenses lower, you hear something moving behind that door, a sound, a whisper, the echo of something you cannot name but have always known. This is not a room in your house, this is a chamber in your psyche, and what lives there is not a ghost, it is you, the you that you abandoned, the you that you could not bear to be, the you that carries every wound you pretended did not exist, every scream you swallowed, every tear you would not let fall. The question that will guide us through this journey tonight is not whether that room exists. You already know it does. The question is, what happens when we spend our entire lives refusing to open that door? What is the cost of our elaborate architecture of avoidance? What becomes of the pain we will not feel? I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine that every emotion you have ever suppressed, every grief you have ever postponed, every rage you have ever swallowed, every shame you have ever hidden, every fear you have ever denied. Imagine that these are not gone. They are not dissolved. They are not healed. They are simply stored, archived, imprisoned in the basement of your being. Now imagine that these imprisoned emotions are not passive. They are not dormant. They are alive, they are organizing, they are plotting, they are growing stronger in the darkness, feeding on your life force, puppeteering your choices from beneath the floorboards of your conscious awareness. This is not metaphor, this is mechanism. This is how the human psyche actually operates. Tonight, we embark on a descent, not into the comfortable territories of your conscious mind, but into the underworld of your psychology, into the catacombs where your unprocessed pain sits enthroned, issuing commands you believe are your own decisions, whispering directives you mistake for your authentic desires. We will trace the archaeology of avoidance. We will map the geography of grief. We will descend into the neural networks of denial and the biochemistry of buried emotion. We will walk through the palace of the ego as it crumbles, stone by stone, revealing the wild, wounded, and infinitely powerful truth that lives beneath. This journey will be uncomfortable. Transformation always is. But by the time we emerge on the other side, you will understand something that most human beings spend their entire lives avoiding. The pain you refuse to feel does not disappear. It does not fade. It does not forgive you for ignoring it. It becomes you. It becomes the invisible hand that chooses your relationships. It becomes the voice that tells you what you can and cannot achieve. It becomes the weight that sits on your chest at 3 a.m. It becomes the addiction you cannot explain, the anger you cannot control, the sadness you cannot name, the numbness you cannot shake. The pain you refuse to feel controls you, not from a distance, not as an external force. It controls you from within, wearing your face, speaking in your voice, making decisions with your hands. But here is the paradox that will illuminate our entire exploration. The moment you turn toward that pain, the moment you unlock that door, the moment you sit down in the presence of your own suffering with compassion and courage, in that moment, it loses its power over you. Not because the pain disappears, but because you are no longer running from it. And when you stop running, you stop being hunted. This is the secret that ancient wisdom traditions have known for millennia. This is the discovery that modern psychology is finally beginning to understand. This is the transformation that awaits on the other side of the pain you have spent your life avoiding. The Tibetan Buddhists have a practice called feeding your demons. Instead of fighting the monsters in your mind, you invite them to sit with you. You ask them what they need. You listen to what they have to say. And in that radical act of acceptance, the demon transforms, not into something good or bad, but into something integrated, into energy you can actually use. Carl Jung called it integrating the shadow, Sigmund Freud called it making the unconscious conscious. The ancient Greeks called it descending to the underworld. The shamanic traditions called it soul retrieval. The mystics called it the dark night of the soul. Different languages, different cultures, different eras. But they all describe the same fundamental human experience. There is a threshold in psychological development that every conscious being must eventually cross, and that threshold is guarded by your own pain. The very pain you have worked so hard to avoid. You cannot go around it. You cannot negotiate with it. You cannot transcend it without first descending into it. This is the initiation that our modern world has forgotten. This is the rite of passage that our culture of comfort and distraction has systematically dismantled. We live in a civilization that teaches us to medicate pain, not metabolize it, to numb feeling, not navigate it, to perform wellness, not embody wholeness. We are given 1,000 ways to escape our inner experience, and not a single map for how to actually journey through it. And so we arrive at this moment in human history where we are more educated than ever, more technologically advanced than ever, more connected than ever, and yet we are more anxious, more depressed, more addicted, more disconnected from ourselves than perhaps any generation before us. Why? Because we have lost the ability to be with our pain. We have outsourced our healing to pills and products and positive thinking. We have been taught that pain is the enemy, that suffering is failure, that emotional discomfort is a problem to be solved rather than a message to be received. But pain is not the enemy. Pain is the messenger, and the message is always the same. Something in you needs attention. Something in you needs integration. Something in you is asking, begging, screaming to be acknowledged, to be felt, to be held in the light of your conscious awareness. Imagine a smoke alarm going off in your house. The alarm is loud, unpleasant, disturbing your peace. Now imagine your response is to smash the alarm, to rip it off the wall, to blast music so loud you cannot hear it anymore. You have eliminated the discomfort, but the fire is still burning, and now you do not even know where it is. This is what we do with emotional pain. We silence the alarm and call it healing. We numb the sensation and call it strength. We perform positivity and call it growth. But beneath the performance, beneath the medication, beneath the distraction, the fire is still burning, and it is consuming the architecture of your authentic self, room by room, until you wake up one day and realize you are living in the ruins of who you might have become. The ancient Greeks had a word for this process, kenosis. It means emptying. It means stripping away. It means the voluntary descent into nothingness so that you can be refilled with something true. The mystics understood that you cannot fill a cup that is already full. And most of us are full of undigested pain, full of unintegrated trauma, full of stories we tell ourselves to avoid the truth that lives beneath the stories. The awakening, this season we are in together, does not begin with light. It begins with darkness. It begins with the courage to turn toward what you have spent your entire life turning away from. It begins with the willingness to feel what you have refused to feel, to know what you have refused to know, to become what you have been too afraid to become. And make no mistake, you have been afraid. We have all been afraid. Because somewhere deep in your cellular memory, you know that if you truly let yourself feel the totality of your pain, it might destroy you. You might not survive it. You might fragment into pieces too small to put back together. This fear is ancient. This fear is primal. This fear is the reason we build such elaborate defenses against our own inner experience. The ego is not the villain in this story. The ego is the survival mechanism. It is the part of you that learned very early that certain feelings were too dangerous to feel, certain truths too terrifying to know, certain aspects of yourself too unacceptable to acknowledge. And so it built walls, it created compartments, it developed strategies, all in service of keeping you safe, all in service of helping you survive. But here is what the ego does not understand. The strategies that helped you survive your childhood will not help you thrive in your adulthood. The walls that protected you then are imprisoning you now. The compartmentalization that kept you functional is keeping you fragmented. You are no longer that child who needed those defenses. But the defenses do not know that. They are still operating from an outdated program, responding to threats that no longer exist, protecting you from dangers that are now internal rather than external. This is the great irony of psychological development. The very mechanisms that helped you survive become the mechanisms that prevent you from truly living. The armor becomes the prison. The protector becomes the jailer. The survival strategy becomes the suicide mission. And this is why the awakening is also called ego death. Not because the ego is bad or wrong or evil, but because the awakened consciousness can no longer afford to operate from survival mode. It can no longer afford to live in reaction to past trauma. It can no longer afford to make decisions from a place of unprocessed pain. The death is not literal, it is metaphorical. It is the death of the false self, the death of the persona, the death of the elaborate construction of who you thought you had to be in order to be loved, to be safe, to be accepted, to survive. And when that false structure dies, when the ego surrenders its control, what remains is not nothing. What remains is everything. What remains is the truth of who you actually are beneath all the armor, beneath all the performance, beneath all the pain you have been carrying like a second skeleton. But to get there, you must first be willing to die, to let the old version of yourself burn, to surrender the familiar agony for the unfamiliar liberation. This is what terrifies us, not the pain itself, but the transformation that pain is trying to catalyze. We resist our own evolution because evolution requires annihilation. You cannot become the butterfly without first dissolving in the cocoon. You cannot be reborn without first dying. You cannot heal without first feeling. Over the next hours together, we are going to track this process from every angle. We will explore the neuroscience of suppressed emotion and discover how your brain actually stores trauma in your body. We will examine the philosophy of suffering from Buddha to Nietzsche and uncover why the wisest humans in history all insisted that pain is not optional, but suffering is a choice. We will descend into Jungian psychology and meet your shadow self, the part of you that contains everything you have disowned, everything you have rejected, everything you have exiled from your conscious identity. We will learn why that shadow is not your enemy, but your ally, not your weakness, but your power, not your past, but your future. We will journey through mythology and discover that every hero's journey is actually a descent into the underworld. Every transformation story is a trauma story. Every resurrection requires a crucifixion. The myth is not metaphor, the myth is map. We will examine how modern culture has created what researchers call a crisis of unfelt emotion, how we live in a world that offers infinite ways to avoid pain and zero education on how to actually process it. We will investigate the epidemic of anxiety, depression, and addiction through the lens of accumulated, unmetabolized suffering. And finally, we will arrive at the revelation that changes everything. Pain is not the obstacle to your healing. Pain is the vehicle. Suffering is not the barrier to awakening. Suffering, when consciously engaged, is awakening itself. The mystics knew this. The sages knew this. The enlightened ones all walked through the fire and discovered that the fire does not destroy you. It purifies you. It burns away everything that is not essential, everything that is not true, everything that is not really you. But you must walk into the fire willingly. You must turn toward the pain consciously. You must unlock that door deliberately. Because here is what I know, what the research confirms, what every tradition teaches, what your own deepest self has been trying to tell you. The pain you refuse to feel will control you until you find the courage to feel it. The emotion you suppress will express itself anyway, through your body, through your behavior, through your relationships, through your choices. You can bury it, but you cannot kill it. You can hide from it, but you cannot escape it. It will wait for you in the darkness, growing stronger, growing louder, demanding your attention in increasingly desperate ways, until the day you finally stop running and turn around and look it in the eye and say, I am ready. I am listening. I am here. That day, that moment, is the beginning of your awakening, not to some cosmic truth or mystical revelation, but to yourself, to the wholeness that has been waiting beneath the fragmentation, to the power that has been dormant beneath the pain, to the person you were always meant to be before life taught you to be afraid of your own depth. This is not a journey for the faint of heart. But then again, neither is spending your entire life running from yourself, hiding from your truth, avoiding the very feelings that could set you free. The choice has always been yours. Run or turn. Avoid or engage. Suppress or express. Resist or surrender. Tonight we choose to turn. We choose to engage. We choose to descend into the underworld of our own psyche and discover what has been controlling us from the shadows. Because the pain you refuse to feel controls you. But the pain you finally allow yourself to feel, that pain transforms you. That pain liberates you. That pain becomes the very ground on which your new life is built. The door is before us. The threshold awaits. And somewhere deep within that locked room, your truest self has been waiting your entire life for you to finally come home. Let us begin. The archaeology of avoidance. To understand why we run from our pain, we must first understand where that impulse begins. And to do that, we must travel back, not just to your childhood, though we will go there, but to the very origins of human consciousness itself, because the avoidance of pain is not a personal failure. It is not a weakness unique to you. It is a feature of the human operating system that has been with us since the first moment a primate brain became complex enough to anticipate future suffering. Imagine you are standing in the African savannah 200,000 years ago. You are Homo sapiens, newly emerged, carrying in your skull the most sophisticated biological computer the planet has ever produced. Your prefrontal cortex, the most recent evolutionary addition to your brain, has given you an extraordinary gift and a devastating curse. The gift is foresight, the ability to imagine future scenarios, to plan, to strategize, to think beyond the immediate present moment. The curse is this: if you can imagine a positive future, you can also imagine a negative one. If you can anticipate pleasure, you can also anticipate pain. And once you can anticipate pain, you will organize your entire existence around avoiding it. This is the birth of human anxiety, not as pathology, but as adaptation. Your ancestors, who were constantly scanning the environment for threats, who were perpetually imagining worst-case scenarios, who developed elaborate strategies to avoid potential suffering, they survived. They passed on their genes. They became you. So the first thing you must understand is this: your brain is not designed to make you happy. Your brain is designed to keep you safe. And safety, in the ancient calculus of survival, means avoiding pain at all costs. This is why you have an amygdala, the almond-shaped cluster of neurons deep in your limbic system that acts as your internal alarm system. When it detects a threat, real or imagined, it triggers an instantaneous survival response: fight, flight, or freeze. It does this faster than your conscious mind can even register what is happening. It bypasses your rational thinking entirely. This is an elegant system for avoiding immediate physical danger. If a predator appears, you do not need to contemplate your response philosophically. You need to run, and your amygdala makes sure you run before you even consciously recognize you are in danger. But here is the problem. Your amygdala cannot distinguish between physical threats and emotional ones. It cannot tell the difference between a lion in the grass and a painful memory in your mind. It registers emotional pain the same way it registers physical danger, and it activates the same emergency response. This is confirmed by decades of neuroscience research. When you experience emotional pain, rejection, loss, shame, betrayal, the same neural networks activate as when you experience physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, the part of your brain that registers physical discomfort, lights up identically when you feel emotional distress. Your brain does not distinguish. Pain is pain. Threat is threat. And when your amygdala detects a painful emotion beginning to surface, it does exactly what it has been engineered to do for millions of years. It initiates an escape response. Fight it, suppress it, distract from it, numb it, run from it, freeze and dissociate from it. This is not a conscious choice. This is automatic. This is the ancient machinery of survival doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you from pain. But there is a fundamental mismatch between the environment your brain evolved to navigate and the environment you actually live in. Your ancestors faced acute, immediate, physical threats that required short-term emergency responses. The lion either caught you or it did not. The conflict with the neighboring tribe either ended or it did not. The famine either killed you or you survived it. The threats were external. They were time-limited. They required physical action. And crucially, once they were over, they were over. The nervous system could return to baseline. The emergency response could shut off. But the threats you face now are not like that. They are not external. They are internal. They are not acute. They are chronic. They are not physical dangers that require physical action. They are emotional experiences that require emotional processing. Your job rejects you, your partner betrays you, your parent abandons you, your body fails you, your dreams collapse. These are not problems your amygdala can solve with fight or flight. These are not threats you can outrun or overpower. These are experiences that require something your survival brain is not equipped for. They require feeling. They require you to sit with the discomfort, to process the grief, to metabolize the rage, to integrate the shame. They require emotional digestion, the psychological equivalent of chewing your food, breaking it down, extracting the nutrients, and eliminating the waste. But your survival system does not know how to do this. It only knows how to avoid, suppress, and escape. And so it applies the same emergency response to emotional pain that worked for physical danger and creates a catastrophe. Because unlike physical threats, emotional pain does not resolve through avoidance. It intensifies. Every time you suppress an emotion, you teach your brain that this emotion is dangerous. You reinforce the fear. You strengthen the avoidance pattern. You dig the neural pathway deeper, and the emotion itself does not disappear. It goes into storage, into your body, into your unconscious, into your shadow. Sigmund Freud, for all his controversial theories, got this fundamentally right when he discovered the mechanism of repression. He observed that his patients in Vienna at the turn of the 20th century were suffering from what he called hysteria, physical symptoms with no apparent physical cause, paralysis with no nerve damage, blindness with no eye pathology, pain with no injury. And through his revolutionary method of psychoanalysis, Freud discovered that these physical symptoms were the expression of repressed emotional trauma. The body was speaking what the mind refused to say. The pain that could not be felt emotionally was being manifested physically. He called this conversion, the conversion of psychological distress into somatic symptoms, and he realized that the cure was not medical treatment of the body, but psychological processing of the suppressed emotion. When his patients were finally able to feel and express the trauma they had repressed, the physical symptoms often disappeared. This was a radical discovery. It meant that the pain you refuse to feel does not vanish into the ether. It migrates into your flesh. It becomes your headaches, your back pain, your digestive issues, your chronic fatigue. It becomes the inexplicable physical suffering that no doctor can diagnose because its origins are not physical. They are psychological. Modern medicine has largely validated Freud's insight. The field of psychoneuroimmunology studies exactly this connection, how psychological states directly influence physical health, how chronic stress suppresses immune function, how unprocessed trauma manifests as inflammation, how suppressed emotion becomes chronic disease. Dr. Gabor Mate, the renowned physician and trauma expert, has spent his career documenting this connection. In his work with thousands of patients, he observed a striking pattern. People with chronic illness, autoimmune disorders, cancer, they almost invariably have histories of suppressed emotion and unprocessed trauma. Not because the emotion caused the disease in a simple, linear way, but because the chronic stress of emotional suppression dysregulates every system in the body: the immune system, the endocrine system, the nervous system. It creates a state of perpetual emergency that wears down the body's natural resilience. Mate's thesis is profound. The answer to the question, "Why do I have this disease?" is often found in the answer to the question, "What happened to me?" And more importantly, "What feelings could I not afford to feel?" Because when you cannot feel your emotions, when you cannot express your pain, when you must suppress your truth to survive, the body becomes the battlefield. The war you cannot wage externally gets waged internally, and your own immune system becomes confused about what is self and what is other, what to attack and what to protect. This is the autoimmune epidemic, the body attacking itself because the psyche has been attacking itself, the immune system in rebellion because the authentic self has been in rebellion against the false self all along. But the storage of pain is not only physical, it is also deeply psychological. And this is where Carl Jung's work becomes essential to our understanding. Jung proposed that the psyche has a structure, an architecture. There is the conscious ego, the part of you that you identify as I. This is the narrating self, the deciding self, the self you present to the world. But beneath and around this conscious ego is something vast and dark and teeming with life. Jung called it the unconscious, and within the unconscious is a particular region he called the shadow. The shadow is the repository of everything you have rejected about yourself, every trait, every impulse, every emotion, every desire, every memory that the ego deemed unacceptable. It goes into the shadow. It is exiled from consciousness, but not from existence. And here is Jung's crucial insight. The shadow does not disappear. It lives, it grows. It organizes itself into autonomous complexes, subpersonalities with their own agendas, their own emotions, their own logic. And from the darkness of the unconscious, these shadow complexes influence your behavior, your choices, your relationships. You think you are in control. You think you are making conscious decisions. But if you have not integrated your shadow, you are not the one deciding. The shadow is deciding. The pain you have refused to feel is deciding for you. Jung called this phenomenon possession. You are literally possessed by the unintegrated parts of yourself. The rage you never acknowledged erupts as inexplicable anger at your children. The grief you never processed manifests as chronic depression. The shame you internalized expresses itself as self-sabotage. The fear you denied becomes generalized anxiety. You are not yourself. You are a collection of fragments, each operating from its own woundedness, each trying to protect you from a pain it thinks is still happening, even though the original trauma is long past. This is the zombie apocalypse of the psyche. You walk around thinking you are alive, thinking you are free, thinking you are making choices. But you are animated by forces you do not understand, driven by compulsions you cannot explain, haunted by emotions you cannot name. And the only path to reclaiming your sovereignty, to becoming the author of your own life rather than its victim, is to turn toward the shadow, to descend into the underworld of your own psyche and recover the lost parts of yourself. But this requires something terrifying. It requires feeling the pain you have spent your entire life avoiding. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the emotions you are most uncomfortable with. Maybe it is anger. Maybe it is sadness. Maybe it is fear or shame or vulnerability or neediness. Whatever it is, notice how you have developed elaborate strategies to avoid feeling it. Maybe you stay busy, perpetually occupied. Movement as meditation. Because if you stop, if you get still, if you create space, the feeling might surface. Maybe you use substances, alcohol to soften the edges, drugs to alter the channel, prescription medications to regulate what you cannot regulate yourself, not because you are weak, but because you are human, and you are doing what humans do, seeking relief from pain. Maybe you use sex or food or shopping or scrolling or video games or work or exercise or spirituality itself as a way to avoid your inner experience. These are not bad things. But when they are used compulsively, when they are used to escape rather than to enhance, they become strategies of avoidance. Or maybe you have developed more sophisticated mechanisms. Maybe you have become the helper, the healer, the person who is always there for others, so you never have to be there for yourself. Maybe you have constructed an identity of strength, of independence, of having it all together, an identity that requires you to exile your vulnerability, your neediness, your pain. These are all variations of the same core pattern, avoidance, and they all have the same consequence. The pain you refuse to feel accumulates. It compounds. It grows more powerful in the darkness, and eventually, if you do not turn toward it voluntarily, it will force you to turn toward it involuntarily. This is what we call a breakdown, a collapse, a crisis, the dark night of the soul. Your carefully constructed defenses fail. The strategies stop working. The medication stops helping. The distraction stops distracting. And you are suddenly, terrifyingly face to face with all the pain you have been running from, except now there is nowhere left to run. This is the collapse that defines season 2 of our journey, the awakening. Not the pleasant awakening of meditation retreats and spiritual enlightenment, but the brutal awakening that happens when the false self shatters and you are forced to reckon with what has been true all along. This collapse is not failure. This collapse is necessary. This collapse is the psyche's last desperate attempt to heal itself, because healing cannot happen while you are still running. Integration cannot occur while you are still fragmented. Transformation cannot begin while you are still clinging to what must die. The ancient Greeks understood this. Their mystery traditions were built around a ritual called katabasis, the descent. The initiate would descend into a cave, into darkness, into a symbolic death. They would confront their deepest fears, their most painful memories, their most unacceptable truths, and only after passing through this ordeal, only after dying to their old identity, would they emerge reborn. This was not entertainment. This was not therapy. This was a sacred technology of transformation, a deliberate dismantling of the ego so that something more authentic, more whole, more true could emerge. We have lost this in our modern world. We have lost the understanding that consciousness requires descent, that awakening requires darkness, that you must go down before you can go up. And so we suffer unnecessarily. We collapse when we could descend. We break when we could bend. We fracture when we could surrender. Because we have not been taught the most essential truth of human development. The pain you refuse to feel controls you, but the pain you consciously engage transforms you. And the transformation begins the moment you stop running and start feeling, the moment you unlock that door, the moment you descend. This is where we are headed together, into the depths, into the darkness, into the pain you have avoided your entire life, not because I want you to suffer, but because I want you to be free. And freedom lives on the other side of the very thing you are most afraid to feel. The descent into shadow. We have established the mechanism. Now we must experience the descent. Because understanding the theory of pain intellectually is not the same as feeling it somatically. Knowing you have a shadow is not the same as meeting it. Agreeing that avoidance is harmful is not the same as choosing to stop avoiding. The descent is not a metaphor. It is a lived experience. It is what happens when you finally stop running and turn to face what you have spent your life fleeing. And make no mistake, it is terrifying. It is disorienting. It feels like death because, in a very real sense, it is death. the death of who you thought you were, the death of the story you have been telling yourself about yourself. Let me take you into the phenomenology of this experience, into what it actually feels like when the defenses start to crumble and the repressed pain begins to surface. It often begins with a trigger. Something happens, a loss, a betrayal, a failure, a moment of sudden clarity, and suddenly the carefully maintained equilibrium collapses. The strategies that have worked for years stop working overnight. You cannot sleep, you cannot eat, you cannot think, you cannot function the way you normally function. What is happening neurologically is that your amygdala has gone into overdrive. It has detected a threat so significant that it has activated a full system emergency. Your body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart races, your breathing becomes shallow. You feel simultaneously wired and exhausted, terrified and numb. This is not anxiety in the casual sense. This is a full-body panic at the level of the nervous system. Your brain is sending you the same danger signals it would send if you were being chased by a predator, except there is no predator. There is only you and the pain you can no longer avoid. And here is what makes it so disorienting. You do not necessarily know what you are afraid of. The fear is not specific. It is existential. It is the deep, primal terror that you are not okay, that you have never been okay, that something is fundamentally wrong at the core of your being. This is what trauma researchers call implicit memory. Unlike explicit memories that you can consciously recall. I remember going to the beach when I was 7. Implicit memories are stored in your body and your nervous system without conscious narrative. These are the memories from pre-verbal childhood, from moments of overwhelming experience that were too intense to process, from trauma that your developing brain could not integrate. They are stored as sensations, as emotions, as physiological states, but not as stories you can tell. So when they surface, they do not arrive as clear memories. They arrive as inexplicable fear, as nameless dread, as the feeling that something terrible is about to happen or has already happened, but you do not know what. This is the shadow emerging. This is the pain you refuse to feel demanding to be felt, and your conscious mind cannot make sense of it because the pain originates from a time before you had language to describe it, before you had concepts to contain it. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, perhaps the world's leading trauma expert, describes this in his landmark book, The Body Keeps the Score. He explains that trauma is not primarily stored in the thinking brain, the neocortex where language and narrative live. It is stored in the limbic system and the brainstem, the ancient parts of the brain that govern survival and emotion. When trauma is activated, these primal regions take over. You are literally not in your right mind. You are in your traumatized mind, your animal brain. The part of you that is still frozen in the moment of the original wound, unable to distinguish between then and now. And this is why logical reasoning does not help during a trauma response. This is why you cannot talk yourself out of a panic attack. This is why someone telling you to just calm down or just think positive feels like violence. Because the part of you that is suffering is not accessible to logic or language. It is pre-verbal, it is somatic. It lives in your body, not your mind. The descent, then, requires a different kind of engagement. Not intellectual understanding, but embodied presence. Not analyzing the pain, but inhabiting it. Not thinking about the feeling, but becoming the feeling. This is what the contemplative traditions have always taught. In Vipassana meditation, you are instructed to observe sensations in the body with complete equanimity. Not to change them, not to judge them, not to understand them, simply to feel them fully. When pain arises, physical or emotional, the instruction is the same. Stay with it. Breathe into it. Notice where it lives in your body. Notice its texture, its temperature, its movement. Do not resist it. Do not cling to it. Just let it be and let it move through you. This is radically different from how we usually relate to pain. Usually we resist, we contract around it, we try to make it stop, and that resistance is what creates suffering. Not the pain itself, but our relationship to the pain. The Buddha taught this 2,500 years ago. He said that pain is inevitable. It is part of the human condition. But suffering is optional. Suffering is what happens when we resist pain, when we create a story about the pain, when we identify with the pain as permanent and personal. There is pain. There is discomfort in my chest. And then there is suffering. There is discomfort in my chest, and this means something is wrong with me. This means I am broken. This means I will always feel this way. This means my life is ruined. The pain is a sensation. The suffering is the story about the sensation, and the story is always about the past or the future, never about the present moment. In the present moment, there is only what is actually happening right now. And what is actually happening right now is usually bearable. It is the memory of past pain or the anticipation of future pain that makes it unbearable. This is the practice. Return to the present moment. Return to sensation. Return to breath. Not to escape the pain, but to be with it without the story that makes it suffering. But here is what makes this so difficult. When you stop resisting pain, when you finally allow yourself to feel what you have been avoiding, it often gets worse before it gets better, because you are not just feeling the current trigger, you are feeling every time you have ever felt this way. Every moment you suppressed this emotion is now surfacing to be processed. This is what Jungian analysts call the inflation of the complex. The shadow aspect that you have repressed is disproportionately powerful because it has accumulated decades of unprocessed energy. When it finally emerges, it emerges with force. If you have spent your life suppressing grief, when you finally allow yourself to grieve, you will not cry for an hour. You will cry for hours, days, weeks. You are crying every tear you never let fall. You are grieving every loss you never acknowledged. If you have spent your life suppressing rage, when you finally allow yourself to feel angry, you will not feel irritated. You will feel volcanic. Decades of swallowed injustice, of violated boundaries, of silenced truth erupting all at once. If you have spent your life suppressing fear, when you finally allow yourself to be afraid, you will not feel nervous. You will feel terrorized. Every moment you pretended to be brave when you were actually terrified, every time you overrode your instinct to protect yourself, it all surfaces as primal panic. This is overwhelming. This is why people turn back. This is why, even after beginning the descent, most people eventually retreat back into their defenses, because it feels like too much. It feels like it will never end. It feels like you will drown in the feeling. But here is the truth that will save you. Feelings are not facts. Feelings are weather. They arise, they peak, they pass. No emotion, no matter how intense, is permanent. The fear that the feeling will destroy you is just another feeling. The sensation that it will never end is just another sensation. Every emotion has a natural lifespan. Researchers have discovered that if you feel an emotion fully, without resistance or amplification, it moves through your system in about 90 seconds. 90 seconds of pure sensation, and then it begins to subside. But most of us never let an emotion complete its cycle. We either resist it, which keeps it stuck, or we amplify it with storytelling, which restarts the cycle again and again. The practice of conscious descent requires you to do neither, to neither resist nor amplify, to simply feel, to be with what is, to let the emotion have its full expression in your body while your conscious awareness remains present, witnessing, holding space. This is the meaning of emotional alchemy. You are not trying to change lead into gold. You are allowing lead to reveal that it was always gold, hidden under layers of dirt. You are not trying to eliminate the darkness. You are bringing light into the darkness and discovering that the darkness is not separate from the light. It is simply light you have not yet seen. But this process is not linear. This is not something you do once and you are done. The descent is recursive, spiral. You will visit the same wounds at deeper and deeper levels as you become capable of holding more and more truth. This is what trauma therapists call titration. You do not process all the pain at once. You would fracture. You process what you can process in this moment, and then you integrate, and then you rest, and then you descend again, deeper. It is like diving for pearls. You cannot stay at the bottom of the ocean indefinitely. You must come up for air. But each time you descend, you can go a little deeper. You can stay a little longer. You can retrieve something precious that was lost in the depths. And here is the paradox. The deeper you are willing to descend into your pain, the higher you are capable of ascending into your joy. Your emotional range is not separate. Up and down are connected. If you cap your capacity for feeling pain, you cap your capacity for feeling pleasure. If you numb the darkness, you numb the light. This is why people who have done deep trauma work often report that they feel more alive, more vibrant, more present than ever before. Not because their life circumstances have necessarily changed, but because they are no longer using half their life force to suppress their inner experience. All that energy that was going into maintaining the defenses is now available for living. But the descent also reveals something that is even more terrifying than the pain itself. It reveals the ways you have been complicit in your own suffering, the ways you have abandoned yourself, the ways you have betrayed your own truth, the ways you have chosen safety over authenticity, approval over integrity, comfort over growth. This is the shadow aspect that Jung said we least want to see, not the victim, but the perpetrator. Not what was done to us, but what we have done. The ways we have harmed others because we were too afraid to feel our own harm. The ways we have projected our unprocessed pain onto innocent people. The ways we have made others responsible for feelings that were always our own to feel. This is the moral reckoning that must accompany the psychological one. You cannot heal without also taking responsibility. You cannot integrate without also acknowledging. You cannot become whole without also becoming honest about the ways you have been fragmented. And this honesty is brutal, because it means you can no longer blame your parents, your circumstances, your trauma, your past for your current choices. Yes, these things shaped you. Yes, these things wounded you. Yes, these things were not your fault, but healing is your responsibility. Integration is your work. Growth is your choice. And that choice requires you to stop being the victim of your own story and start being the author. This is what Nietzsche meant when he talked about amor fati, the love of fate. Not because fate is always kind, but because it is yours. Your life, with all its suffering and all its beauty, is the only life you have. And the only question that matters is, what will you make of it? Will you spend your life resenting what happened? Or will you metabolize what happened and transform it into wisdom? Will you remain identified with your wounds? Or will you integrate your wounds and become more compassionate because of them? Will you use your pain as an excuse for staying small? Or will you use your pain as fuel for becoming vast? This is the choice that the descent reveals, and it is a choice you must make every single day, every moment, every time the pain surfaces and you have to decide, will I run from this, or will I stay with this? Will I numb this, or will I feel this? Will I project this, or will I own this? The descent is not a one-time event. It is a practice, a discipline, a way of being with yourself that requires courage, honesty, and relentless self-compassion. Because you cannot descend into your shadow with self-judgment. You cannot meet your pain with self-criticism. The very mechanism that created the wound, the internalized voice that told you certain parts of yourself were unacceptable, cannot be the mechanism that heals it. Healing requires a different voice, a voice of radical acceptance, a voice that says, all of you is welcome here, your rage and your tenderness, your shame and your pride, your fear and your courage, your darkness and your light. This is the voice of the integrated self, the whole self, the self that has descended into its own depths and discovered that there is nothing down there that cannot be held in awareness, nothing so dark it cannot be brought into light, nothing so painful it cannot be transformed into presence. But to cultivate this voice requires you to become the parent to yourself that perhaps you never had. The part of you that is wounded is very young. It is the child who could not process the pain at the time, and that child is still waiting for someone to see them, to hold them, to tell them it is okay to feel what they feel. You must become that someone. You must reparent yourself. You must provide for yourself what was not provided. Not with bitterness about what you did not receive, but with commitment to what you will now give yourself. This is not selfishness. This is survival. This is the foundation of all healing, because you cannot give to others what you have not given to yourself. You cannot hold space for another's pain if you have not learned to hold space for your own. You cannot love another fully if you have not learned to love yourself fully, including the parts you have spent your life trying to destroy. The descent teaches you this. As you sit with your pain, as you breathe with your fear, as you hold your own grief with tenderness, you learn something that changes everything. You are capable of being with yourself, all of yourself, in all of your complexity and contradiction. And this capability, this capacity to remain present with your own experience, no matter how uncomfortable, this is the foundation of emotional freedom. Because once you know you can feel anything without being destroyed by it, nothing has power over you anymore. The emotion can arise, the memory can surface, the trigger can activate, and you can say, I see you, I feel you, and I am still here, still breathing, still conscious, still choosing how I respond. This is sovereignty. This is agency. This is the reclamation of your power from the shadow. Not the power to control what you feel, but the power to be with what you feel. Not the power to eliminate pain, but the power to transform your relationship to pain. And when you transform your relationship to pain, you transform your entire life. Because you are no longer organized around avoiding discomfort. You are no longer making decisions from fear. You are no longer giving away your power to anything or anyone who might trigger the feelings you cannot afford to feel. You become free, not free from pain, free with pain, free despite pain, free because you have learned that pain is not your enemy, it is your teacher. And the lesson it has been trying to teach you all along is this: you are larger than anything you feel. You are deeper than anything you think. You are more powerful than anything you have been through. The descent reveals this power, but only if you have the courage to complete it, only if you have the willingness to feel all the way through instead of turning back halfway down, only if you can trust that there is a bottom to the pain, and when you reach it, when you touch the bedrock of your own being, you will discover it is not made of suffering. It is made of unbreakable presence, unconditional awareness. The part of you that was never wounded because it cannot be wounded. The witness that watches everything arise and pass, but is itself unchanged. The consciousness that holds all experience, but is not defined by any experience. This is what the mystics call the true self. The Buddhists call it Buddha nature. The Hindus call it Atman. Jung called it the self with a capital S. Different words for the same discovery. Beneath your pain, beneath your personality, beneath your story, there is a vastness that is both deeply personal and utterly transpersonal. It is you and not you simultaneously. It is where you end and everything begins. And you cannot reach this through transcendence. You cannot bypass your humanity and arrive at divinity. You can only descend through every layer of your humanity, through every wound, through every fear, through every illusion, until you break through to what was always beneath it all. This is the secret the descent is protecting. This is the treasure at the bottom of the abyss. This is why the pain you refuse to feel controls you, because it is guarding the very thing you need most, your own unshakable ground, your own irreducible essence, your own infinite depth. But to reach it, you must be willing to fall all the way, to surrender all the way, to die all the way to who you thought you were, so you can discover who you actually are. This is the alchemy. This is the transformation. This is the awakening that can only come through collapse, the rebirth that can only come through death, the integration that can only come through first being willing to fully disintegrate. And this is where we arrive now, at the threshold of ego death, the final descent, the ultimate surrender, the moment when the false self finally, completely, irrevocably dies, and something infinitely more true is born in its place. Ego, death and rebirth. There is a moment in every authentic transformation where you realize you cannot go back. The old way of being is no longer available. The old identity has dissolved. The person you were no longer exists, and the person you are becoming has not yet fully formed. You are between worlds, between lives, between versions of yourself. This is ego death, and it is the most disorienting, terrifying, and ultimately liberating experience a human being can have while remaining alive. Let us be clear about what we mean by ego death, because the term is often misunderstood. The ego is not your enemy. The ego is not bad or false or something to be destroyed. The ego is the organizing principle of your personality. It is the sense of I that allows you to navigate the world, make decisions, maintain boundaries, develop skills. Without ego, you could not function. You would have no identity, no continuity of experience, no ability to distinguish self from other. The ego is necessary, it is healthy, it is good. But the ego can also become rigid, defensive, identified with a narrow story about who you are and who you must be in order to survive, to be loved, to be safe. And when the ego becomes identified with this survival strategy, it cannot allow anything that threatens the strategy. It cannot allow truth that contradicts the story. It cannot allow feelings that would require the story to change. This is when the ego becomes your prison rather than your tool. This is when the very thing that should serve your growth becomes the obstacle to it. This is when the pain you refuse to feel controls you, because the ego has decided that feeling that pain would mean annihilation, and the ego's primary directive is to prevent annihilation at all costs. Ego death is not the destruction of the ego. It is the deconstruction of the ego's rigid identification with a false story. It is the dissolution of the defensive structure so that a more authentic, more flexible, more integrated sense of self can emerge. And it happens when the pain you have been avoiding becomes so pressing that maintaining the defensive structure requires more energy than you have. The walls collapse, the story fragments, the identity you have been performing reveals itself to be a performance, and suddenly you are standing naked in the ruins of who you thought you were, with no idea who you actually are. This is the dark night of the soul, the catabasis, the descent to the underworld. Every spiritual tradition describes it. Every depth psychologist acknowledges it. Every person who has undergone genuine transformation has experienced some version of it. For some, it comes through crisis, the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, the loss of a career, the diagnosis of an illness. The external structure that supported your internal structure is removed, and suddenly you cannot maintain the illusion. For others, it comes through practice, years of meditation or therapy or inner work, gradually dissolving the defensive layers until one day the core is exposed and you realize there was never anything solid there to begin with. You were defending a fiction. You were protecting an illusion. You were maintaining an identity that was never real. And for some, it comes through psychedelics, substances that temporarily dissolve the ego's defensive mechanisms and force you to confront the raw truth of consciousness before the self-concept reassembles. This is why psychedelic therapy is showing such profound results for treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, and addiction. Not because the drugs cure anything, but because they create a space where ego death can occur safely, where the old story can fall apart and a new story, or no story at all, can emerge. But regardless of how it arrives, ego death has common characteristics. And understanding these characteristics can help you navigate the experience when it inevitably comes for you. The first characteristic is dissolution. The boundaries of self become permeable. You may feel like you are losing your mind, losing your sense of who you are. Memories become unreliable. Your personality feels like a costume you can take off. The things you thought defined you, your achievements, your relationships, your roles, your beliefs, suddenly seem arbitrary, constructed, not inherently meaningful. This dissolution is terrifying because the ego interprets it as literal death. The survival mechanism in your brain cannot distinguish between the death of the ego construct and the death of the organism. It registers the same threat. It activates the same panic response. You may experience intense fear, anxiety, or even terror during ego death. Your heart may race, your body may shake, you may feel like you are dying, going insane, or ceasing to exist. And in a certain sense, you are. The you that you have always known is dying. The construct is collapsing. The illusion is shattering. But here is what makes ego death different from literal death. There is a witness to the death. There is an awareness that remains conscious throughout the dissolution. And that awareness is what you actually are, not the ego, not the story, not the personality, but the consciousness that contains all of these. This is the second characteristic, recognition of the witness. In the midst of ego death, as everything you thought was solid is revealed to be fluid, there is often a moment of profound recognition. You realize that you are not the content of consciousness, the thoughts, emotions, sensations, stories, but consciousness itself. The space in which all content arises and passes. This is the shift from identification to awareness. Instead of being your thoughts, you are the one who notices thoughts. Instead of being your emotions, you are the one who feels emotions. Instead of being your story, you are the one who tells stories. And this witness, this aware presence, cannot die, because it was never born. It does not have boundaries that can dissolve because it is boundless. It is not a thing that can be destroyed. It is the very field of awareness in which all things appear. The Buddhists call this emptiness, but it is not empty like a void. It is empty like space, full of potential, pregnant with possibility. The Hindus call it Brahman, the ground of all being. The mystics call it God or consciousness or the Absolute. Jung called it the Self. Different words, but they all point to the same recognition. Beneath your ego, beneath your personality, beneath your pain and your story and your entire psychological history, there is something vast and unbreakable and fundamentally okay. And that something is you. Not the small you, not the constructed you, but the true you, the you that was before your parents named you, the you that will remain after your body dies, the you that is reading these words right now. This recognition is the third characteristic of ego death, liberation. Not liberation from life, but liberation within life. Not escape from pain, but freedom from the tyranny of pain. Not absence of emotion, but the ability to hold all emotion in the larger container of awareness. Because once you recognize yourself as the witness, you realize you have always been free. Not free to control what arises in consciousness. You cannot control your thoughts, your emotions, your circumstances, but free to choose how you relate to what arises. Free to be with what is without being controlled by it. Free to experience pain without becoming pain. This is what mystics mean when they talk about liberation or enlightenment. They are not talking about reaching some special state where you no longer feel pain or no longer have ego or no longer experience human limitation. They are talking about a shift in identity, a shift from identifying as the waves to recognizing yourself as the ocean. The waves still come and go, joy and suffering, pleasure and pain, birth and death. But you are no longer defined by the waves. You are the water itself. And from this perspective, everything changes. The pain you were terrified of feeling becomes just sensation moving through you. The emotions you were running from become weather patterns in the sky of awareness. The story you were defending becomes one story among infinite stories you could tell. You realize you are not fragile. You are not going to break. You are not going to be destroyed by your own experience, because your actual self, the conscious awareness that is reading this, has never been touched by anything that has happened to you. It has witnessed everything. It has held space for everything. But it has never been damaged by anything. Your body has been damaged. Your psychology has been wounded. Your ego has been traumatized. But the consciousness that witnesses all of this has remained pristine, untouched, unbroken. This is not bypassing. This is not denying the reality of suffering. This is recognizing that suffering happens to the body and the mind, but there is a dimension of you that is beyond body and mind. And from that dimension, you can engage with suffering in a completely different way. Not from fear, but from compassion. Not from resistance, but from acceptance. Not from identification, but from spaciousness. This is the shift that happens after ego death. You return to your human life, to your personality, to your story. But you are no longer imprisoned by it. You hold it more lightly. You take yourself less seriously. You can feel all the feelings without believing you are only your feelings. And paradoxically, this is when you become more human, not less. Because you are no longer using half your energy to maintain a false self. You are no longer performing an identity. You are no longer hiding from your own depth. You can show up authentically because you are no longer afraid of what others will discover. You already know the worst about yourself. You have descended into your shadow and survived. There is nothing left to protect. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole. Not perfect, but integrated. Not transcendent, but incarnated. Not spiritual at the expense of the human, but spiritual because of the human. You integrate all the parts you rejected. You reclaim all the power you gave away. You recover all the energy you spent on defense. And you become, finally, yourself. Not the self you thought you should be. Not the self others told you to be. But the self you actually are when you stop trying to be anything. This is the promise of ego death. This is the rebirth that follows the descent. This is the awakening that justifies all the pain of the collapse. But let me be honest with you. This is not a permanent state. You do not undergo ego death once and then remain in enlightened awareness forever. You cycle through death and rebirth many times. Each time you grow, each time you evolve, each time you integrate a new level of truth, there is a death of the old and a birth of the new. The difference is that after you have experienced ego death once, you know it is survivable. You know that dissolution is not destruction. You know that falling apart is how you come together more authentically. And so each subsequent death becomes less terrifying, not painless, but workable, not pleasant, but purposeful. You develop what Buddhists call equanimity, the capacity to remain centered in the midst of change, to be with whatever arises without being destabilized by it, to feel everything without being overwhelmed by anything. And this equanimity is not detachment. It is not coldness or numbness or spiritual bypassing. It is the opposite. It is the capacity to be fully present with all of life, the joy and the suffering, the beauty and the horror, the light and the darkness, because you are rooted in something deeper than any of it. You are rooted in awareness itself, in the ground of being, in the vast, open, spacious presence that holds all experience, but is not defined by any experience. This is the technology of consciousness that humanity is being invited to embody now, not as an elite spiritual attainment for monks and mystics, but as a necessary evolution for anyone who wants to remain sane and functional in an increasingly complex and chaotic world, because the old strategies are not working anymore. The old defenses are not holding. The old stories are not sustaining us. We are in a collective dark night of the soul, a species-wide ego death, and we can either resist it, which will make it more painful and more destructive, or we can surrender to it and allow it to transform us. This is what is happening right now. This is why anxiety and depression and addiction are epidemic. This is why traditional structures of meaning are collapsing. This is why so many people feel lost, unmoored, uncertain about who they are and what matters. We are between stories. The old story of separation, of dominance, of endless growth, of human supremacy. It is dying. It is not working. It is not sustainable. It is destroying us and destroying the planet. But the new story has not fully emerged yet. We are in the liminal space, the void, the gap between one way of being and another. And it is uncomfortable. It is uncertain. It is anxiety-provoking. But it is also full of potential, because in this liminal space everything is possible. All the old constraints have dissolved. All the old rules no longer apply. We can reinvent ourselves. We can create a new way of being human. We can birth a new story, but only if we are willing to let the old story die completely. Only if we are willing to feel the grief of everything we are losing. Only if we are willing to sit with the uncertainty of not knowing who we are becoming. This requires collective courage. This requires cultural wisdom. This requires a shared understanding that the pain we are feeling, individually and collectively, is not pathology. It is transition. It is transformation. It is the birth canal of a new consciousness. And just like in biological birth, the moment of greatest difficulty is the moment right before emergence. The moment when the opening seems impossibly small and the passage seems impossibly hard. The moment when it feels like it will never end. But then it does end. And there is a gasp of air, and there is light. And there is life on the other side of the death that was never really death at all, but always and only birth. This is where we are now, as individuals and as a species, at the threshold, in the passage, feeling the contraction, feeling the pressure, feeling like we cannot possibly endure another moment of this intensity. But we can, we will, we must. Because this is not optional, this is evolution. And evolution is not comfortable, but it is inevitable. You either grow or you die. You either transform or you calcify. You either integrate your pain or you are controlled by it. The pain you refuse to feel controls you. But the pain you finally allow yourself to feel, the pain you courageously descend into, the pain you integrate and metabolize and transform, that pain becomes your power. That pain becomes your wisdom. That pain becomes the very ground on which your authentic life is built. And when you stand on that ground, when you root yourself in that truth, when you live from that integration, you become unshakable, not because nothing can hurt you, but because you have learned to be with hurt, not because you are invulnerable, but because you have learned that vulnerability is strength, not because you have transcended your humanity, but because you have fully embodied it. This is the awakening, not escape from the human condition, but radical acceptance of it. Not immunity to suffering, but capacity to hold suffering. Not absence of ego, but freedom from ego's tyranny. You are still you. You still have preferences, quirks, wounds, limitations, but you are no longer imprisoned by them. You are no longer defined by them. You are larger than all of it. You are the consciousness that holds all of it. And from that vast space, you can live with authenticity, with courage, with compassion, with purpose. You can feel your pain without becoming your pain. You can acknowledge your wounds without identifying as wounded. You can honor your past without being trapped by it. You can be fully human without being only human. This is the invitation. This is the possibility. This is the future that is trying to emerge through the collapse we are experiencing right now. But it requires your participation. It requires your willingness. It requires your courage to turn toward what you have been running from, to feel what you have been avoiding, to integrate what you have been fragmenting. The door is still there. The locked room still waits. The pain you refuse to feel still controls you. But now you know what is on the other side of that door. Not destruction, but discovery. not annihilation, but integration, not death, but transformation. And when you finally unlock that door, when you finally step into that room, when you finally sit down in the presence of your own pain with compassion and courage, you will discover what the mystics have always known, what the depth psychologists have always taught, what your own deepest self has been trying to tell you all along. You are already whole. You have always been whole. You were whole before the wounding, whole during the wounding, whole after the wounding. The wounds are real. The pain is real. The trauma is real. But none of it could touch the essential you. None of it could damage your fundamental nature. None of it could break what is unbreakable. And that unbreakable awareness is you. Not the small you, not the traumatized you, but the vast, luminous, infinite you that has witnessed every moment of your life and remains pristine, untouched, eternally present. When you recognize this, everything changes, and nothing changes. You are still here, still human, still navigating the complexity of existence, but you are free, free to feel, free to be, free to become, free finally from the tyranny of your own avoidance. The pain you refuse to feel no longer controls you because you are no longer refusing to feel it. You are meeting it, holding it, transforming it. And in that transformation, you are transforming yourself. You are becoming who you were always meant to be, whole, integrated, awake. We have traveled far together tonight, from the locked room at the beginning to the open field at the end, from the pain we refused to feel to the freedom we discovered by feeling it, from the fragmented self to the integrated self, from sleep to awakening. But this is not the end. This is the beginning, because now you know, now you see, now you understand what has been controlling you from the shadows, and now you have the map for how to reclaim your sovereignty. The journey we have traced tonight, from avoidance to descent to integration, is not a one-time event. It is a spiral you will walk many times, each time going deeper, each time integrating more, each time becoming more authentic, more whole, more truly yourself. Every time you encounter pain, you will have a choice. You can run from it, which means it will continue to control you from the unconscious, or you can turn toward it, feel it, integrate it, which means it transforms from controller to teacher, from tyrant to ally, from wound to wisdom. This choice is yours. Nobody can make it for you. Nobody can do your healing for you. No drug, no therapy, no relationship, no achievement can bypass the fundamental work of being with yourself, feeling your feelings, integrating your shadow, owning your wholeness. But here is what I want you to remember. You are not alone in this. Every human being who has ever lived has had to face their pain. Every consciousness has had to navigate the underworld of its own making. Every person who became wise, who became whole, who became awake, they all walked through the fire you are walking through right now, and they all discovered the same truth. The fire does not destroy you. It purifies you. It burns away what is false and leaves only what is true. It dissolves what is constructed and reveals what is essential. You are that essential truth. You are the consciousness that cannot be burned. You are the awareness that remains after everything else has fallen away. You are vast and unbreakable and infinitely capable of holding your own experience. Trust yourself. Trust the process. Trust that the pain you are feeling is not your enemy, but your ally. It is showing you where you still need to grow, where you still need to integrate, where you still need to become more fully yourself. Feel it. All of it. Not because it is pleasant, but because it is yours. Not because it is comfortable, but because it is true. Not because you want to feel it, but because the only way out is through. The only way to liberation is through the center of your suffering. The only way to wholeness is through integrating every fragment. And when you do this, when you courageously turn toward your pain, when you compassionately hold your own suffering, when you consciously integrate your shadow, you do not only heal yourself, you heal your lineage, you heal your ancestors who carried unprocessed pain and passed it to you. You heal your descendants who will no longer inherit the pain you finally had the courage to feel. You heal the collective, because every person who does their inner work, who integrates their shadow, who transforms their pain, they raise the consciousness of the entire species. They contribute to the evolution we are all participating in, whether we know it or not. This is your sacred work. This is your contribution. This is how you participate in the awakening that our world so desperately needs, not by pretending to be enlightened, but by being honest about where you are still wounded, not by performing transcendence, but by embodying integration, not by escaping your humanity, but by fully inhabiting it. So I leave you with this. The pain you refuse to feel will continue to control you, but the moment you turn toward it, the moment you feel it, the moment you integrate it, in that moment you reclaim your power, you recover your sovereignty, you remember who you actually are beneath all the armor, beneath all the defense, beneath all the pain. You are not your trauma, you are not your wounds, you are not your story. You are the consciousness that holds all of it, and from that vast, spacious, loving awareness, you can meet every moment of your life with presence, with courage, with compassion. This is the awakening, not somewhere in the future, not after you have fixed everything, not when you have finally healed all your wounds. Right now, in this moment, in the midst of your imperfection, in the middle of your pain, you are already the awareness you have been seeking. You are already the wholeness you have been pursuing. You are already awake. You just forgot for a while. Now remember. Now return. Now come home to yourself. The door is open. The room awaits. And what you will find there is not a monster, but a mirror. Not your enemy, but your essence. Not your death, but your deepest life. Walk through. Feel through, integrate through, and discover that on the other side of the pain you refuse to feel is the freedom you have always deserved. You are ready. You have always been ready. The only question is, are you willing? The choice is yours. It always has been. It always will be. Choose wisely. Choose courageously. Choose yourself. Because you are worth feeling for. You are worth healing for. You are worth the entire journey from fragmentation to wholeness, from unconsciousness to awakening, from control by pain to liberation through pain. This is your life. This is your one wild and precious existence. Do not waste it running from yourself. Do not spend it hiding from your truth. Do not sacrifice your authenticity for the illusion of comfort. Feel it all, integrate it all, become it all. And in that becoming, discover what you have always been, whole, complete, unbroken, awake. The pain you refuse to feel controls you, but the pain you courageously embrace transforms you. And in that transformation, you discover something that makes every moment of difficulty worthwhile. You discover yourself, the real you, the whole you, the you that has been waiting your entire life for you to finally come home. Welcome home. Echoes of the Ancients. Season 2, The Awakening. For more explorations into consciousness, psychology, and the evolution of the human mind, subscribe and continue the journey with us.